Recording has started. I'm going to hand this over to you, Todd Smith.
All right. We've got a number of attendees joining. I am going to go ahead and share my screen and start with a welcome to everybody joining tonight for our Fall 2020 Environmental Justice Element Implementation webinar. So welcome. For those of you who haven't been to one of these before, this is our second one. The first one was in January of this year. Before we really get started, I do want to give a brief moment for our Spanish interpreters to do a bit of interpretation here for anyone joining on the Spanish channel.
Okay, Todd, go ahead. They are in the Spanish room providing that.
All right. So tonight's meeting agenda is pretty straightforward. We're just going to start with the welcome and introductions, cover some logistics of using Zoom. We'll have a brief background on the environmental justice element. We will briefly cover our accomplishments in 2020, followed by a question and answer session about those. Then we're going to ask some questions about 2021 prioritization. This is where we'll ask you, the meeting attendees, what priorities you'd like us to focus on in 2021. We'll have another question and answer session, and then we'll just discuss next steps. So starting with introductions, myself, Todd Smith, I'm a principal planner for Sacramento County in the long-range planning team. We also have John Lundgren, who is doing some IT tech support behind the scenes tonight. And we have Leanne Mueller, senior planner in our group, who is assisting with the Q&A session and the polls. Our email addresses are on the screen there. If you wish to contact us after the meeting, feel free to do so. Briefly, the logistics tonight, we are recording this webinar. We want to make sure that it's going to be available after the fact for anyone who wasn't able to join us tonight. It will be posted on our website. You could have joined tonight either by Zoom, using the Zoom app online, or by phone. And just as an FYI, for those people joining by phone, you will not be able to participate in some of the polling exercises and the Q&A, but we will, if you would like to reach out to us after the fact, we can gather input from you if you so desire. We also want to make you aware of the online features in Zoom that we're going to be using tonight. So you should see, hopefully at the bottom of your Zoom window, the Q&A function. That's where you can input written questions for us to respond to periodically during the Q&A session. We'll also be doing some real-time polling during this webinar. And those questions are really geared to provide us some feedback about our priorities for implementation. We're going to be disclosing responses in real time, and we want to assure you that your identity will be. So if you're providing a certain response, please, we need your feedback to assist with implementation. There's an option to, with a moderator, if you need some technical assistance. So this will get us going as an icebreaker poll, just to show you how it works. So this is a quick poll. Which superpower would you like to have? Mind reading, invisibility, teleportation, flying, or you already have a superpower? You can enter your poll response on the screen. And we'll share those momentarily.
Thank you, everybody. It looks like we're doing okay on the tech. We've got 30 attendees and 24 of 30 have been able to vote so far. So that's 25. We're pretty successful. I'll keep the poll open for another 30 seconds or so, and I'll publish the results.
And just for everyone's information, the hosts in Zoom aren't able to vote. So it should reflect the majority of the attendees with those exceptions. All right, so we have the results on the screen now. I'll read them for those of you who might be on the phone. Mind reading was about 15%, invisibility 12%, teleportation 23%. Flying is the winner tonight, 31%. So almost a third of people voting tonight wanted to fly. And then just under 20% of folks already have a superpower. Congratulations to those of you who are so gifted. So briefly, we're going to cover the background of the environmental justice element. Sacramento County's element was adopted in May of 2018. We refer to it as phase one. It was the first EJ element in the state of California, with the exception that you see on the slide here, those that were required due to litigation. As part of our phase one element, we established at the county 4 environmental justice communities that are shown on the graphic here on the right side of the slide, excuse me. North Highlands, Foothill Farms in the north, West Arden Arcade, kind of central, North Vineyard area, which is toward South Sacramento, and then the actual South Sacramento environmental justice community. Phase 2 was adopted December of 2019, so nearly a year ago. And this is where we built on phase 1. We did significant additional public outreach and policy development. We had an environmental justice advisory committee participating in that with us. And we are in our first year of implementation. So this brings us to our second poll. We want to know, how did you first hear about this webinar? Who are you representing tonight, if anyone? And were you previously involved in the outreach efforts for the EJ element? So we'll give you a few minutes to answer those questions. How are we
All
doing
right,
on results, John?
we're at 31 attendees, 24 have voted, and it hasn't gone up, so I'm going to go ahead and end the.
Todd, we do have a question that we should probably answer live, which was how were the EJ communities defined?
Excellent question. Sorry, I've got the results here on the screen. We'll leave them up while I answer the question. The EJ communities were defined by a combination of two tools. The first one is a tool that is published, produced by California EPA called CalEnviroScreen. It is a database, geographic database that incorporates a number of either pollution or health or other indicators related to environmental justice topics. It's done statewide. We also used the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, or SACOG as we refer to them, Metropolitan Transportation Plan Sustainable Communities Strategy data gathering exercise in which they identify low income, high minority communities. And then we took both of those data sources, overlaid them geographically to Sacramento County's existing identified communities and looked for commonality and tried to identify existing community boundaries that would be logical for for the purposes of community planning and more of a community scale as opposed to sub geographic areas. So the poll results here show that the majority of folks tonight heard about this webinar via the EJ subscriber notification. That's good to know for us. We would encourage anybody who is not subscribed to that to please do that. We'll give you a link to that at the end of this. Wow, that's great. The who are you representing tonight? We've got a number of folks either at a service organization, local government, or state government, a few from a church and other, but the majority of us, or the attendees rather, are representing yourselves and your community. And that is really encouraging as staff to see this. This is something that we have wanted to achieve in terms of participation. We really want to reach the community with our efforts. So I mentioned at the beginning of this that we had our first one of these stakeholder meetings in January of this year, and nearly a year has passed and a lot has changed. We were able to do that one in person. We had a much more kind of live action back and forth about defining priorities for 2020. And we set out to identify our priorities for this year using these criteria. We have asked the question, will our priorities institutionalize environmental justice as part of the county's regular business practices? We asked whether the priorities were potentially already funded and had a staffing commitment. And finally, we asked whether the priorities would provide co-benefits across other related community issues and county priorities. And so this slide shows the 5 priorities that were identified as a result of that outreach meeting in the first part of this year, and then some internal discussions. So we committed to the annual stakeholder meeting process and report card, which we'll talk about later. We identified it as a priority to form this executive level working group internal to the county that would be informed by meetings like this and conversations with the community. That would get to implementation within the county and external to the county. It would also inform decision making as it relates to certain activities that the county would be undertaking on an annual basis. And finally, it gets to budgeting. We talked a lot about in that meeting about how we as a county prioritize certain efforts over the course of the year, such as the capital improvement program is one of those for infrastructure as an example. The third priority for this calendar year was the food system assessment. This is something that was called out as one of the policies in the environmental justice element. And I want to say thank you to our partners at the Sacramento Food Policy Council. We'll get to this in a minute, but they were successfully awarded a grant, and along with a number of other partners in that process. We have also, the fourth item we identified was the employee training for planning and environmental review staff. That would help institutionalize EJ as part of our normal business practices. Finally, we identified Community Planning Advisory Council, or CPAC, training. This is something that we normally do on an annual basis. It's something that we try to educate and inform existing and council members of either new regulations or new policy or direction that the county wants to provide to these appointed members on the community planning advisory councils. A little bit more detail here on those implementation activities. So the report card that we mentioned, this is something that is formulated at the end of each calendar year. We look back and say, how did we do? Did we do a good job at implementing our priorities for this past year? And we put that in our general plan annual report. That goes to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors every calendar year, typically around March. That's where we also identify our work plan for the upcoming calendar year, which is informed through meetings like this. The executive level working group is something that is in progress. We've identified members of that group that can help institutionalize environmental justice issues and guide the county towards implementation. We use that as a meeting to review the comments that come in, whether it's comments from last year or comments from this year, or people's suggestions in various community meetings on other topics that are related to environmental justice. That also serves to elevate EJ implementation within the various operating departments and helps inform decision-making across multiple departments and budgeting to some extent. Some of you on this last bullet item, some of you may have heard that the county recently declared racism as a public health crisis. That was an effort that was led by our partners in the county's public health department. And we see a tie there as well related to environmental justice. And we're having conversations about what that means as it relates to EJ implementation for the county. So the food system assessment, our partners in health services are conducting a food system assessment, to assess baseline conditions, and that would inform the preparation of a food action plan. Our employee training was initially conducted at our department-wide all-hands meeting. The staff who worked on the element provided a simplified version of the policies and implementation measures to really inform all of our staff what this means for them. We have section-specific trainings in the works. And we have this training as a discussion topic ongoing of our diversity, equity, and inclusion employee group. I mentioned earlier the CPAC training that we normally do every year. This year has been a wild ride for all of us. We were not able to host the annual CPAC appreciation and training event, but we are, due to COVID, we are transitioning though to prepare online training modules related to not just environmental justice, but other planning related topics. But environmental justice is a part of that effort.
Todd, John Lundgren, I'm going to pause you, and you may have already done this when I was in the Spanish room, but for the Spanish interpreters, I'm going to repeat that CPAC stands for Community Planning Advisory Council. It's a group of citizen advisors appointed by the Board of Supervisors who advise the county planning department and Board of Supervisors on issues of land use and planning.
Thanks, John. So other activities that were related to some of those, related or not related in some cases, to some of our priorities for 2020. Listed on the screen here, we wrote a grant application support letter for the Sacramento Native American Health Council. A similar letter was written for the food system assessment for a USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture grant. That grant was recently awarded September 2020, and that has kicked off. We've just had our first couple of meetings on that topic or that food system assessment recently. And that's a 2-year time frame for that food system assessment. So that'll be ongoing after this calendar year. Related to COVID, which is a big thing this year, obviously. So John actually works sometimes in the Emergency Operations Center. And because of his background on the EJ element, he was able to share a lot of information that helped inform the COVID testing and vaccine locations to ensure they were equitably located. We also were consulted as the county was identifying business navigators, which were generally folks that were put in place to help guide small businesses navigate the various permitting avenues internal to the county as we looked at different regulatory relaxation as in the early months of the COVID pandemic. We also used our environmental justice subscription list to notify folks of other related initiatives. And this is where we talk about the co-benefits, the active transportation plan, the climate action plan, and the Re-envision West Arden Arcade visioning plan. All of these are seeking to implement certain policies in the environmental justice element. And we were able to use our subscription list to let interested parties know about those activities. We have also used translation and interpretive services like those that are being used tonight as part of our housing element update, which is ongoing, and the Re-envision West Arden Arcade outreach that John and others are part of. One of the things that the housing element update is looking at, which is an outgrowth of the EJ element, is overcrowding and immigrant communities. That's being included in the housing element update. The Re-envision West Arden Arcade plan. This was a grant opportunity that we were able to receive because of the early work on the environmental justice element. Staff is developing a special curriculum to engage students. Staff has reached out to the local schools in that community and their administrators and got permission to engage with the students. And finally, related to the climate action plan, we've got a couple of representatives added to this focus stakeholder group that we're working with. Some of those folks participated in the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, and they're helping us to inform any new programs that come out of the climate action plan to help prioritize investments in the county's environmental justice communities related to climate action. So this is where we've kind of done a self-reflection and identified these areas for improvement. The executive level working group has been a challenge to form. And I'm not trying to make excuses. I will say it's been a challenge to get people's attention this year because of the ongoing pandemic and the focus of county resources in dealing with that. So we are continuing to form and elevate the importance of that. Staff is continuing to highlight the need to budget for and fund EJ supportive outreach measures, things like multilingual technology support, interpretive services, stipends, and other inclusive methods to really strengthen the county's community engagement. Employee training is something that is an ongoing need. It's not something that we do it once and say we're done, especially even within our own department. It's something in the general plan is something that is a document that serves multiple departments, and we see a need for that training to extend beyond our department. So I'm going to pause and take a sip of water, and we're going to have a brief Q&A time. How are we doing in the Q&A?
So we do have one question, and it has to do with implementation. And the question is that when is implementation expected, and that it seems like the community has shared a vast amount of needs, suggestions, and ideas. And then the question is, how do these become tangible outcomes and solutions?
That's a great question. And I will try to answer simply. This is our first year of implementation. It is difficult to, from a long-range planning perspective, to say that we're going to have everything implemented in 1 year or 2 years or 5 years. Some of these activities, for example, the food system assessment, that was identified for a 2-year time frame. Once that document is done, it turns into a food action plan that gets implemented. So in terms of something shorter term, I'll use something related. The climate action plan, which has co-benefits associated with environmental justice. We're trying to take that to adoption or for adoption at the board in the middle of 2021. As an outgrowth of that, we're identifying potential programs to prioritize investments in the county's environmental justice communities. And those are dependent on funding coming in and then being applied to various improvement projects or programs in the communities. For a more concrete example, no pun intended, some of the transportation improvements that the county is working on are within the environmental justice communities. So things like the active transportation plan, or even road or bicycle or pedestrian improvements, those are not necessarily coming out of the planning and environmental review office, but they're coming out of the county's transportation department. So I think we can do a better job of pointing to those projects as they're delivered in those communities to help show that this is a project that's an outgrowth of the county's investment, whether it's through a grant fund or other programmed funds. And this also touches on EJ implementation.
So we do have another question that we should probably answer live, and this has to do with how the county efforts on this overlap and coordinate with the other levels of government, such as the city and the state, and how is it unique or distinct from those other levels?
So that one, that's an interesting question too, because if you remember back to that graphic of the environmental justice communities in Sacramento County, a couple of those are immediately adjacent to other jurisdiction boundaries. I'll use an example in South Sacramento. We have a defined geography within Sacramento County. Immediately adjacent is the city of Sacramento. So one of the things that we as staff do at our planner to planner level, we talk to our counterparts in the adjacent jurisdictions. For example, the city of Sacramento has a Stockton Boulevard corridor plan that they're working on. And it includes both a pretty lengthy stretch from not just the city incorporated area, but it also includes the unincorporated area of the county. So we're trying to make sure that we're not working at odds with each other. We're trying to do something that benefits the community and can be cross-jurisdictional, if you will. To the extent that state activities overlap, that's I think what I would say there is if there are state programs or funding sources that we can look to help support county implementation, that's what we need to do. There's often, I shouldn't say often, there's sometimes state activity or regulation or directives that we have to respond to and incorporate into our various documents. Sometimes it's less kind of tangible and on the ground from a planning perspective.
So Todd Smith, how about we pause just a second here and let our interpreters hand it off if they want to. Elizabeth, I see you on camera. Thumbs up if we're slow enough, or thumbs down if we need to slow. Okay, interpreters, thumbs up. We're going a good tempo. You almost hit on it, Todd. We have another question about how the funding for EJ works. You talked about it a bit. Maybe you could just elaborate.
Sure. So staff funding. So I'm going to limit my response to the planning and environmental review world. So our long-term planning activities are funded by a surcharge on building permits. So it's a certain percentage of all building permits countywide. It roughly translates to between $600,000 and $700,000 on a calendar year, on a budget year, I should say. And that varies depending on the number of building permits that are issued in the county. So economic cycles affect that number. That's the internal funding mechanism. The other way staff work can be funded, and the Re-envision West Arden Arcade project is an example of this. We can look for grant programs. So the Re-envision West Arden Arcade project is funded is almost entirely funded by a Caltrans grant. It's a Sustainable Communities Caltrans grant. And I say almost funded because a lot of the state grant programs don't fully cover the administrative costs of the work that we have to do. Those are the two biggest ways that EJ implementation work is funded. Some of the more tangible implementation activities, like the infrastructure investments that I mentioned, there are other grant programs that seek to either prioritize or score highly those projects that are within environmental justice communities or that are implementing environmental justice policies. So things like transportation, alternative modes, bicycle, pedestrian improvement projects, those types of projects can also often score higher than their counterparts that aren't in environmental justice communities. But those are all almost always grant funded, or those grant funds supplement some other local transportation dollars, I should say.
Todd, we do have a question about what are the smaller short-term plans and projects that we can apply and make happen within 2020, and how orgs and nonprofits support the mission and EJ element areas.
So one of the challenges this year has been well, it's the pandemic, right? So everybody is shifting into different work modes. A lot of us, and presumably a lot of the attendees, may be working remotely. It is really hard to do effective community engagement via this platform. As far as the community partnerships, I think we need to continue having conversations as best we can with those folks. One of the things we want to see coming with those ongoing relationships is those connections being made with the communities that we're here to serve, and knowing what will work best for those communities. Some of the community organizations are, kind of the eyes and ears of the community. We want to use that local knowledge to deliver what is needed. We don't want to do something in a vacuum and something that's not supported by the community. So I think as far as those community organizations, the nonprofits, the collaboratives, however they're described, the best way to assist is to let us know what you know, so that we can help deliver. If it's something that we can do, something that we can set a policy framework for, something that we can put you in touch with in another department, excuse me, if it's not a planning related thing, but it's something else, we'll try to help you navigate the county's system, the different chains of command, etc. But as far as something short term in 2020, in terms of projects, I don't know that we're there yet. Frankly, this is the first year of implementation. All right, if there aren't any more questions right now, I'm going to move on to the next segment.
Todd, I have one more for you. In fact, I will answer it, give you a chance to take a voice break. So the question is in reference to the action the Board of Supervisors took declaring racism as a public health crisis. And the question is, could health services speed up the food system assessment and food action plan? And while I don't know the answer to that directly, and we can certainly check in with health services, I want to take the opportunity to let all the attendees know that staff was very aware and watched very closely what the board did there. As a matter of fact, Todd Smith, who's our presenter tonight, and all of our bosses here, the rest of the staff on the call, we have already talked about this at our weekly team meeting. What does this mean for us and how will it inform the work we do? And I am not going to make it into any small thing by saying that we have it figured out. But I do want everyone to know that we are taking it seriously, and we know that it's going to take a lot more work and understanding to help us find and kind of root out that any issues of structural racism that exist in the county's processes. And it's a learning experience for all of us. And we just want to present to you that we're humble and open, and we understand as government representatives, we have a lot to learn there. But while I can't answer directly for health services, I want to say that the staff on this call, and I know on the rest of PER and the county, we've taken this seriously, and we definitely understand there's a lot of work to do, and we're thankful for the leadership that's been exhibited so far. Todd Smith, back to you.
All right. Thank you for taking that and giving me a voice break. So this slide, moving into 2021, we have a number of ongoing efforts. The food system assessment is one of those. That is, I want to sort of respond to the question about speeding that up. I think that we identified the 2-year time frame as part of our discussions with the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, who included members of the Sacramento Food Policy Council. I think that if I think we put that time frame on it because there was some uncertainty about the funding coming through to actually do it. So now that we, or not we, but the folks who were awarded the grant have that funding, they are in the early stages of beginning that work, and we can check in with them on the long-term plan. It's something that is a partnership that we're looking forward to continuing with not just the Food Policy Council, but the rest of the big team that's working on that. So for 2021, I mentioned earlier, we want to continue the executive level working group. We see a really big benefit to that as far as institutionalizing environmental justice within the county. One of the other things that is becoming more and more a priority is a countywide communication strategy. This is something that has been a real challenge this year to actually implement because of the focus of a lot of county resources on the response to the pandemic. But we see a need for that, not just in planning work, but in just overall how the county is communicating. We're having some conversations with the public information officer staff about that. I mentioned earlier the climate action plan. We are really pushing hard to get that done and adopted so we can start implementing the climate action plan in the middle of 2021. And that is something that achieves those co-benefits. And what we mean when we say that is in the context of the climate action plan, we know that disadvantaged communities are disproportionately affected by climate change. So some of the programs that we're trying to develop as part of the climate action plan would seek to reduce that disproportionate impact. And then finally, the housing element update. This is something that touches on, as it relates to EJ, safe and sanitary homes, affordable housing for all, not just certain segments of the population. And we are going to deliver that by May of 2021. And that achieves not just the housing element regulatory requirements, but it also will implement some of the policies and implementation measures of the environmental justice element. These are our staff identified priorities this year. But this is where we are looking for some feedback to round out that list. So the topics here are on the screen here are the topics that are in the environmental justice element itself. So promoting civic engagement, which would be the countywide communications and outreach plan. Crime prevention, which is related to security and crime prevention through environmental design. This goes to how we review development projects through a lens of preventing crime through the design of the projects. Healthy food access, the food system assessment and food action plan are part of that. Physical activity, which touches on youth master plans, it touches on active transportation. Promoting public facilities, as not just the county, but other service districts within the area have facilities. How can we promote those within environmental justice communities? Reducing pollution exposure. This is something, as an example, the Sacramento Air Quality Management District is working on something related to air pollution. But this goes into water quality as another example. And as a co-benefit that I mentioned earlier, the Climate Action Plan is looking at increasing tree canopy in environmental justice neighborhoods. So one of our implementation measures is surveying the environmental justice communities for tree planting sites. We want to be able to identify the right places that are desired in each community and the right species of trees to be planted to help improve or reduce, I should say, the heat island effect, to improve the filtration of air through tree canopy. And then safe and sanitary homes. This is the affordable housing ordinance review and potential revision that's coming out as part of the housing element. So this is where we're looking for feedback from the attendees tonight. So we're going to do another poll that gets to these questions on the screen. Which of those topics is most important to you as a either attendee representing your community or yourself or one of the organizations you're associated with? Which of those topics is least important to you? And we would ask that you choose your top 3.
And we recognize that there's sensitivity around asking, this is John Lundgren speaking, that there's sensitivity around asking people to pick just one. And we want to let everyone know at the end of the webinar, a survey will come up that has space for providing any feedback you'd like to give and providing short answers. And so we definitely want you to know we're not locking you into just this choice, and it's definitely not going to be a conclusive that's what we're going to work on. This polling exercise is just it's a quick pulse check and a little way for everyone to have some awareness of what people on the call, what their priorities might be. I'm going to leave the poll up for about another 30 seconds and also let everybody know that we're going to enter into another Q&A session after this, shortly after this, to kind of pull on any threads that have come out as part of this polling and the most recent discussion Todd's had with us here.
All right. So let's look at these results. Number one, which topic is most important? Overwhelmingly, reducing pollution exposure, 40%. Safe and sanitary homes and healthy food access came in second at 20% each. And then the remaining four are all at 5%. Promote civic engagement, crime prevention, physical activity, and promoting public facilities. As far as least important, crime prevention, 60%, standouts there. And then promoting public facilities, 15%. Promote civic engagement, 10. And then healthy food access, reducing pollution exposure, safe and sanitary homes at 5. And physical activity, 0%. All right. Top 3 implementation priorities here. Affordable housing in the lead, 85%. So this is the Affordable Housing Ordinance Review Revision. Second was the Food Action Plan at 75%. Countywide Communications and Outreach Plan, 50% was next on the list. Survey for tree planting at 40%. Then Youth Master Plans at 35%, and Security and Crime Prevention through Environmental Design at 30%. Okay. Interesting. In a good way. Thank you all for that feedback. That's helpful. And now, as John mentioned, we're going to have another Q&A session.
Okay.
What do we have in the Q&A?
So we do have actually 2 questions, but they're related, and it has to do with the climate action plan and whether it is addressing systemic racism, which has led to the disproportionate impacts that the EJ communities are burdened with. And there's, especially in the light of the resolution, considering racism, declaring racism as a public health crisis. And then there's a follow-up question: is there a willingness to go back and revisit the plan in light of the resolution to ensure this is being addressed?
Sure. So I would say we're in the middle of preparing the plan. So I don't think there's a need to go back and revisit it. We're preparing it as we speak. We have an opportunity right now to take that into consideration. So with that resolution was just adopted a week and a half ago. So that is what John mentioned earlier about how we are already having discussions about how that informs our work. That's an example of something that we have to look at through that lens as we work on the climate action plan. Anything else in the Q&A?
Yeah, We do have a question about whether or not the county is reinterpreting its goals and projects in light of the issues that the pandemic has exacerbated, especially with regard to focus on parks and community gardens on vacant lots to help those dealing with food insecurity.
Could you read that one more time?
Yes, sorry. How is the county reinterpreting its goals and projects in light of the issues that the pandemic has exacerbated? Will more efforts be focused on parks where people can gather and exercise safely, or the creation of community gardens on vacant lots to help those dealing with food insecurity?
Thank you. Two parts, I think, to answer that question. The first is, as it relates to the park question. So regional parks, this is related to the provision of park services. So the county is one of the many park providers in the region, or the county, I should say. The county's regional park system has remained open during the pandemic. I've been using it frequently to get some exercise. And obviously there's the requisite social distancing and protective measures. The challenge with the county as it relates to the local independent or dependent park districts, all of them have a different governing board that make decisions independent of the county. And as far as I know, as far that they're external or outside facilities, there hasn't been a lot of change other than the playgrounds being, at least in the city of Sacramento where I live, the playgrounds being marked off for a period of time. I can't speak to all of the park districts, what they're doing though. The second part of the question about urban agriculture on vacant lots, that's something that we already have provisions for in the zoning code. They're allowed with some minimal regulatory overview. But the county, if the county doesn't own the land, there's a limited ability for the county to do something with it. So we can certainly encourage it. We can be supportive of neighborhood initiatives to use that property to the best of their ability and their need. There also has to be a willing property owner to do that, but we would be supportive of it.
Todd, this is John Lindgren. There's another question, and I'll read it and I will answer it and give you a break because I've been able to stare at it here and come up with a response. So the question is, the EJ element mentions that it seeks to site sensitive receptors away from pollution sources, but it does not state the inverse, that polluting land uses should not be permitted near sensitive receptors. In recent years, industrial projects have been built adjacent to homes without any buffer. Warehouses, for example, across the street from homes in North Highlands. The question is, what is the county doing to prevent industrial facilities from building next to homes, schools, and parks? And so how I would answer that is, you are absolutely correct. I want to share that I had an aha moment in preparing the environmental justice element, because being brought up as a land use planner, I was under this assumption that we had buffers. I would have said, oh, well, that's how you design it. You put the residential and then you buffer it with a little light commercial and the industrial's out on the periphery. And I learned that that's not the case. And so the question is stating a point that is true. And so that is why we addressed that in the environmental justice element. One of the most direct ways we can address that is through the California Environmental Quality Act process. When that industrial use wants to come in, but not all industrial uses will be subject to the California Environmental Quality Act process. Therefore, that's where the environmental justice element becomes such a powerful tool for us, because it allows us as staff to say, hey, time out. We have policy guidance that says, as a staff planner, I'm allowed to bring this into my thinking. I'm allowed to incorporate this into my staff report and my recommendation to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. It gives us what we call nexus, or a connection to a law that is coming out of public safety, health, and welfare. And that gives us the power then to put conditions on those industrial facilities to require those buffers. And so the EJ element, environmental justice element, will help that situation in two ways. It gives us, as I say, the backbone to write about it, but it also raises awareness. It raises awareness both in the community and for the planner that this is an important topic to be discussed. And I will add to that, I have a feeling one of the challenges of writing the environmental justice element was that there was already supporting policy in other elements of the general plan. For example, in the air quality element, or the land use element, or obviously the housing element. And so we wanted to be careful not to duplicate or contradict policy that was in other elements. And so I'm just finding it too difficult tonight to open up the air quality element and look through that really quick. But I know that in the environmental justice element, we cited about 3 air quality element policies that were supportive of this topic of buffering sensitive uses. And so that was another technique we brought to bear. We had a lot of discussion about it as to how do we prepare the environmental justice element. And what we ultimately landed on was, when we as planners, because it's hard. I just said, I can't do it tonight on the fly. How can we expect you as attendees of this meeting or citizens to know what's in that air quality element on the fly? So that's why we at least thought what we could do to help most was to flag it in the environmental justice element and say, hey, attention, there's also supporting policies in the air quality element.
Any other questions coming in?
It looks like we don't have any questions right now.
Okay. Well, I will cover our next steps. So first off, I want to say thank you all for listening to us and participating tonight, giving us some feedback on what we can do better, what we can do to prioritize the things that are important to the communities that we serve. Our goal, our next step, is to take a closer look at the feedback we got tonight, summarize it, and then work with county leadership to develop our work plan for 2021. And that, as I mentioned earlier, but I'm going to say it again, goes into the general plan annual report, where we will have this report card on how we did in 2020 and our work plan for 2021 in the annual report that's provided to the Board of Supervisors and at the Planning Commission around the March timeframe. One of the, there it is, the survey. So first off, those of you who are attending tonight and entered your email and when you signed on tonight, you'll get a survey following the close of this webinar. And that's a space that John mentioned earlier. It's a space for you to provide some more in-depth feedback, letting us know something specific that we didn't capture or that wasn't represented in the polls or the questions. You can give us additional feedback through that survey. Then the question at the beginning of this, how did you find out about this? So if you have not already subscribed to the environmental justice topic through the county's, it's called a Gov Delivery system. It's a really simple way to stay in the know about what's going on related to environmental justice implementation. You can go either to the environmental justice webpage or quite simply scan this QR code that's on the screen. Take out your smartphone or your tablet with a camera, scan it. It'll take you right there. There are a number of other topics you can subscribe to if you're interested in the climate action plan. There's a topic you can self-select. You want to receive updates about that too. And a lot of other topics unrelated to planning. So again, I want to say thank you, and please take the survey that'll be following this webinar. And with that, are there any other questions that came in while I've been talking?
Yes, it looks like we did have a question, and that was whether TOT grants could be used for projects that have an environmental justice nexus.
I just answered that one. This is John Lundgren in the text, and so I'll just repeat what I wrote. I hit send right about the time Leanne came on there, which is absolutely TOT grants, which TOT stands for Transient Occupancy Tax. It's a tax paid by people in Sacramento County when they have a hotel stay and when they stay in a hotel or motel. There may be other aspects of it that I'm not aware of. And that tax is collected by the county and then used to fund community enhancement programs. And so indeed, when the county on an annual basis gives out grants to community organizations, that is a very valid criteria that would be used to evaluate the grants and rank them. There is another question that's come up, and I'll read it out while I'm unmuted. And it's about, is there a social media presence? Somebody received an email about the meeting tonight, but they wanted to know if there was outreach through social media platforms. And Todd Smith, I'd like you to take that one and build on that community outreach plan.
Absolutely. So that's one of the challenges we have with the broader communication strategy of the county. Most of the individual departments don't have a social media presence. There are a few, but not very many. So one of our tasks in working with the Public Information Office is to get more awareness of things like this event tonight, or other outreach going on, or other activities, to advertise it more broadly to those people who are interested in or get information from social media. So that's something we're working on. It's a work in progress, but we are not very much engaged in social media right now. Oops. All right.
I am not
Anything
seeing
else,
any more questions. Ms. Mueller, are you seeing anything more?
I am not seeing anything else.
All right.
Okay, well, what that means is please don't close your browser when I end this webinar. A after webinar survey should come up for you where you can provide us additional feedback about tonight. And on behalf of myself, I would like to thank everybody and give a special thank you to our Spanish interpreters, Elizabeth and Maria. Very great job. Thank you very much. Christy Graybo with planning, also behind the scenes, helping us answer questions on the Q&A tonight. Leanne Mueller, also helping answer questions with Q&A. And Todd Taylor with Sacramento County in the Spanish language room, making sure that things are going smoothly for our interpreters. And Todd Smith, thank you so much on behalf of all of us, your staff. You had the hard job tonight, and for that we look up to you. But most importantly, we're just staff. Thank you to the people who attended tonight. We had up to 31 attendees. We're at 26 right now. Thank you all very much for the time. You honor us and you honor your community by being part of this process tonight. Thank you very, very much.
Absolutely. Thank you to all the attendees.